I can sew together a version of you that loves her with a version of you that can...
Yes, do it. Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Severance Season 2, Episode 3. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. Episode title, Who is Alive? We're going to discuss our overall thoughts on Severance Season 2, Episode 3. We're going to dive into spoilers, theories, and all that kind of stuff. But first, Patrick Klepek, let's follow up on a few things from last week's episode of the podcast and of Severance. There was something we didn't really dive too much into on last week's episode. That was the opening credits of Severance. I think I mentioned that the show has new opening credits this season, but I didn't really dive into it. I thought about making a video analyzing the opening credits, but there's already a few of them out there. And in particular, there's one that I wanted to shout out called 27 Hidden Clues and Details You Missed in Severance Season 2's opening credits. And it kind of does like a frame-by-frame analysis of the opening credits that I thought was pretty good. And so I'm just going to link to that instead of trying to do an analysis myself. But I did want to highlight a couple of things in the opening credits that were interesting. First of all, at one point in the opening credits, Adam Scott's character is like on this piece of ice in a lake, and in the distance you see a vehicle in there. Like you see a vehicle in the lake, and it's like, what's going on there? Some people have identified that as Miss Selvig's vehicle. Other people speculate that it's the car accident that his wife may have died in. Maybe this is the proverbial cold harbor that we're seeing in the opening credits. The other thing is there's a lot of babies in the opening credits as well. And there was actually an interview over at LA Times. Oliver Latta, who designed the titles for season 2, talked about the direction he got. Ben Stiller gave Latta a directive: let's add babies. The initial idea that Latta had was to flood the screen with versions of Mark, but Stiller suggested adding babies. Thus, there's now a scene where Mark is surrounded by crawling, faceless babies in his bed. I asked Ben Stiller, why babies? Because for me, it's important why we want to do something. What is the aim? What are we trying to achieve? He just said, I like babies. The babies also come in handy when Latta's trying to think of something to put near the end of the sequence. He's pretty sure it's Stiller who suggested a version of Lumon founder Keir Egan as a crawling babe. Latta has no idea exactly what it means. I have my own metaphor, but I don't know the actual answer. We will see when everything is out fully, end quote. So he's referring to the fact that at the very end of the opening credits, Adam Scott's sitting on his bed. He's wearing a red shirt, which, by the way, I'm going to mention again later on this podcast. And a baby crawls into frame, and it has the face of founder Keir Egan on it. A lot of theories about cloning, a lot of theories about what else is going on in Lumon, and I think my guess is the babies will have a significant role. In fact, let's talk about some of your theories about what's actually happening with Lumon and MDR. Brian from Missouri writes in, I think MDR is mapping human brains according to Kira's 4 tempers in order to create a more sophisticated version of Severance, where instead of removing memories, it plugs in someone else's memories during the severed state. This would be used to either grant immortality to someone, like allowing Kira to jump into new bodies on command, or create an army of perfect workers who all have the memories of the ideal employee, an employee who doesn't question management or slack off, end quote. Essentially, Brian and other people have written in with variations of the cloning idea, but basically, like, people whose bodies don't exactly match who they are in some way. Can you plug someone's memories into another body? Can you have multiple versions of one body? These kinds of things, I think, are what is in the air. A lot of people have taken issue with the concept that Miss Casey is a clone, because they're like, well, if you start, like, I don't know if you know this, David, but like when you clone someone, you need to grow them, and it takes decades to grow them, and and it's like, guys, have you ever seen The Sixth Day from Arnold Schwarzenegger? Like they have.
That's the poll.
That's the poll. Deep cut Dave Chen. That's what they call me. DC. So for basically in movies like The Sixth Day, you can have like fully grown clones, and
this is if they want to do clones, they can hand wave this. Like,
right.
Is anyone going to blink? Or they're like, oh no, it turns out we can actually just skip the whole baby.
We can
process.
skip the whole incubating and gestating them and just duplicate them completely. Like I don't think that's going to be an inhibition there. But anyway, Mark M also writes into decodingtv@gmail.com that if Lumen has been cloning, it's quite possible that Miss Huang is one. She's young enough to fall well within the development period of the technology. She's pretty strange, and we haven't seen her go up in the elevator or anywhere on the upper floors. If at least one of Lumen's goals with cloning is to have continuously refreshed pool of secret, unpaid, permanently severed workers, it's possible that they're having mental issues with the severed clones as they age, although not yet with Miss Huang due to her youth. That would explain why Mark is key to the research. He has knowledge of the original or alternative Gemma's personality, which affects his MDR refining and could prove insightful into fixing the problem with being permanently severed, end quote. A lot of people have also been speculating about Miss Huang. I think, like, is she a clone of Miss Casey / Gemma? Is she Mark and Gemma's daughter? I think these theories are flying around. I do think that the one thing that is accurate, that, like, I don't know how this is true, but it feels pretty clear to me that it is true, is like there's something important about Mark doing the work of MDR, of Cold Harbor. And there's something important about the fact that his Audi was married to Miss Casey, right? Like,
Right.
that they have some emotional connection that is important to doing the work of Cold Harbor. Not exactly sure, like, how it all connects yet. Maybe it's like they need somebody who knew Miss Casey on the outside to be able to help develop whatever version of her they're working on with Cold Harbor on the inside. Not sure. I'm just vaguely kind of stabbing at things.
Well, and
Patrick,
if they could just clone and implant memories, why wouldn't they just clone and implant,
right,
this Mark and just have them continue the work? So something
about
this person,
right? Exactly.
Like, again, we theorize, like, what if this isn't the only version of, like, whatever the case, but there's something about this version, this Mark asks, like, this person has to stick around to see this work, this specific project through, and this project seems to have very specific, particular importance to Lumen beyond the many other things that they seem to be experimenting with in their facility.
Yeah, indeed. Only other thing I wanted to mention before we get to this episode, Patrick Klepek, did you see that Ben Stiller posted a kind of parody video of Severance with Tim Cook clocking in for episode 2?
I saw that.
And I just gotta say, weird.
It's a little weird to have the company that, had some controversial, like many companies, return to work policies, is then doing a severed I mean, I get how this happens, but it's just sort of, it's funny and a little odd.
They're both companies that are intensely secretive, with meticulous attention to detail and design, and also have a almost religious like devotion to their founder. So I'm just saying, if I were making a show that had those characteristics, I would not try to encourage people to draw parallels with that show. That's just me, though. I'm not billionaire Tim Cook, right?
Can I throw out one theory that I saw that really has kind of stuck with me? So we don't know yet why Bert, Christopher Walken, is looking at Irving, like, in the moment when they're out, the innies are being the outies out in the real world. And this doesn't necessarily... You're
saying in episode 1 or 2, there's a moment where Irving goes to make a phone call at a phone booth.
Yes.
Right. And Bert is watching him. Right. And
yes.
So we don't know what happened between we also don't know what happened between them on the outside when season 1 ended. Right.
And I saw someone speculating. I can't give it, exact credit, which is why I'll just browse the internet. But and they said maybe it doesn't explain this in particular. But, like, when Bert leaves, isn't there a world where, like, being rewarded to leave the Severance floor is that the innie was so good, the innie then becomes the dominant personality?
What?
Is there nothing stopping Lumen from just populating this very strange world that lives around the Lumen facility that is full of a lot of odd characters with people who are just previous Lumen employees that were outies, that then their innies became the dominant personality, which would allow them some measure of, like, odd control over the surrounding area. I don't know if that explains, like, is that Bert? Bert's innie got to leave, thus, like, explaining why he would have knowledge of Irving? Maybe not, but someone working.
Well, Irving was also banging on his door at the end of season 1.
Yes. I'm not, but it sort of started in the direction of, like,
right.
If we accept that, Helena Helly Like, if it can go one way, is there anything stopping Lumon from having it work the other? And once you sort of introduce that concept, it has some really fascinating possibilities about the kind of control Lumon would have over this very weird city geography that is kind of undefined and kind of unknown. But either way, just the base concept of what's stopping them from letting an innie become the dominant is like, okay. Yeah, I see that's possible.
Yeah. Interesting. Another thing that was also just like talking about how the discourse has been going on the internet over the course of last week. One of the things I've seen really taking off is in season 1, there's that character who got severed to give birth.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people have been wondering about her deal. Because basically her experience, this has been viral, right? Gabby is the name of the character. Congressperson's wife, I believe. And she's like, hey, I've decided to, do Severance to give birth. And how like their life would be, they wake up, they're pregnant, they're in labor, they give birth, then they have to like give the baby away, and then they go to sleep, and then literally the next moment they exist is like they're pregnant again, and they need to give birth again. It's like that must be like a hellish existence for that.
Oh my god,
character.
Oh my god.
Anyway, a lot of people have been talking about that character and yeah, rough stuff.
I don't like that.
yeah. So anyway, that is some of the chatter about what's going on in Severance, some theories, some stuff, some feedback. Always keep the emails coming into decodingtv@gmail.com. We love to hear it. Patrick Klepek, let's talk about season 2, episode 3 of Severance here on Decoding TV, episode 3 entitled Who is Alive? Overall, what do you think of the episode?
I loved it. The season 2 continues to keep asking the questions that I want to be asked, which is we're going to pick away at these mysteries a little bit, but we're not going to obsess over them. And we're going to keep digging into the questions that are really at the heart of the show, about like self-worth, identity. And specifically, I love how in this episode, we get a lot more of what do other people think, especially the people close to the characters we know, their outies, their innies, like what do they make of this situation? And what brought someone like Dylan to this procedure, and how does someone like his wife, that little conversation they have is just that's what I want from this show. Like mildly interested in like what's happening with the goat people. Right. I can sort of take it or leave it there. But that like 18-minute conversation that Dylan's innie has with his wife on the outside, like that is what I'm here for in season 2. And I love that the show is keeping its eye on the ball. Like it's spinning a lot of plates, but I like the proportion of those plates right now.
I'm also a big fan of season 2, episode 3. Great episode. And what is great about Severance, I think, is it does a really good job of revealing information to the audience. Yeah. Like it's stuff happens in this episode that's like going to be pretty consequential to the rest of the season. But it still has like mysteries and like the clip at which information is being revealed to the audience, I think is very reasonable. It's not just like withholding everything to the end, right? Like,
I'll say without, we'll get into the specifics. I texted you at the end of the we tend to not talk too much about what we think about the episodes, but sometimes we'll go over a couple of talking points ahead of the podcast. I want to praise this show so hard for the bravery of like what it does at the end of this episode, because that feels like a season finale, and we're getting it 3 episodes in.
Yes.
Don't waste ideas. See the potential of your ideas. Like, I was rooting for the show when it decided to do what it does at the end of this, because it just feels like a different show does that at the end of. If you told me that scene was the end of season 2, I would have believed you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the show is also really good at ending episodes in a place where you just have to watch the next episode.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh wow, mini cliffhanger, gotta see the next episode.
And we can, David, and we choose not to, because we love our audience. I hope you know the sacrifices we make to not click play.
Absolutely. I'm sure people are really sympathetic to us. Okay. Let's talk about what happens in this episode. Selvig. Let's talk about each of the plot lines individually. Selvig, she starts the episode sleeping in her car. It's actually really sad. This is probably the lowest she's ever been. She's driving somewhere. We don't know exactly where, but we see a sign that says Salt's Neck, 238 miles away. But then Selvig decides to turn around and then drive back. We also see that at one point she looks at this kind of medical breathing tube that's in her passenger seat with like a little hospital tag on it.
Yeah.
Unclear what any of that is. Patrick, I don't think you and I even had any theories, but I think you brought up the great point of like, it's clear that she's trying to decide between two things right now, right?
Well, I mean, the last we see here before this is a confrontation between Mark and her, in which Mark asked, "Do you know anything about Gemma?" And then that clearly it rattles her, like, and she, like, part of her whole personality is like very controlled,
right,
stoic, like poker face. Like that is a huge part of that character, and she feels rattled to her core, and that glance feels like we're not supposed to know what that means, but we're supposed to know that she is struggling over what to do. What that to do is, I think, remains to be seen.
So Salt's Neck, I kind of Googled to see, is this a place in the United States? We know that Severance takes place in a fictional location, but I'm like, it was
sort of like there's, I mean, if you want to really down the rabbit, like there are New Jersey like references throughout the show. It is like unclear. Like, yes, I think it takes place in like Lumon owns like in an unincorporated part. The rumor has been they're in an unincorporated part of New Jersey. Sort of like Lumon's so powerful they own a piece of property, or they kind of run their own little area. But there've been like explicit references in mail and otherwise to New Jersey, putting this sort of wherever it is in proximity. And if you search for, I really doubt that Apple would do this, but if you search for Salt's Neck on Apple Maps, you get a place called Colt's Neck in New Jersey.
Wow.
And so I really doubt they're embedding Easter eggs into Apple Maps.
into an actual like utility that might be used in emergency circumstances.
Right. But you get Colt's Neck, which is an unincorporated community in New Jersey.
Well, I'm just going to say, first of all, when I Google, when I search for Salt's Neck on my Apple Maps, it brings up Salt Lick in Kentucky, United States.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah. So maybe it's personalized.
Diffuses my Easter egg theory, but nonetheless.
So I'm impressed that they chose a place like Salt's Neck. Sounds like a real place.
Yeah.
But when you Google it, the first result is Salt's Neck Back and Neck Devil's Claw Mineral Bath Salt. Made with ultra-powerful Devil's Claw extract and natural essential cage put oil, our specially formulated back comfort mineral bath salt works together with the effects of warm water to soothe and release tension in the back and neck areas as you soak. Quote. So
doesn't feel like one of those, sometimes companies have gotten away from this, but you get like the ARG like there hasn't really been an ARG.
No, I don't think it's an ARG.
Severance. No,
but
I don't think so either.
It's just fascinating that there's no place that even like when you search for Salt's Neck, it's about bath salts that happen to impact your neck. Like that's the only thing you get. So good job choosing the name. Like they probably
I got to give me some bath salts. Dave,
I'm
always saying
like
this.
I think they probably went back and forth trying to figure out a name that like isn't used very much, or has no associations. Anyway, Selvig turns around, she drives back, she gets to Lumon at night. Helly is there. Beautiful sequence, by the way, with all those lights. Like I don't know how they did that. Did they just find this parking lot? Did they like rig this parking lot? Whatever it is, it looks incredible. And she tries to negotiate her way back onto the severed floor. She says, if you want me back, you must accommodate my needs. MDR is non-negotiable. Mark S. is so close to completing Cold Harbor. Milchick must go. He's not equipped for the task. I must be floor manager. End quote. And then Helly disputes all of that. And she's like, I think you are a little bit, getting out in front of your skis a little bit. And then offers to have them talk to the board. So they're like, hey, let's go talk to the board right now in this empty building with my henchman here. And Miss Selvig gets spooked and drives away. Never to be seen. Who knows? Who knows where she's going? Probably back to Salt's Neck is my guess.
What do you think she got spooked by? Because she seems to look at the bodyguard. And
yeah, she's like, maybe they're going to kill me. Like, I think that's literally what she was thinking. Is like, oh, the board is available right now? Really? Just like from the last 5 seconds, that feels like pretty unlikely. It feels more likely that you're just going to murder me and dispose of my body somewhere. That was kind of my sense.
When I was watching, I thought and I wanted to ask you, is like, is there something I'm missing about that bodyguard specifically? Something unnerved her. I was like, did I miss something about the bodyguard that is normally around Helly R? But
I don't
maybe it
think
is
so.
just okay.
I just think he's generally looks imposing. That was my interpretation. But if I'm wrong, hey, yeah, I know people are going to let me know in the comments.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah, that was my sense. Is like she saw this guy. He looks like kind of a mean dude. I mean, in a not like him as a human. I'm just saying, the character. I really appreciate Helly's Audi's performance, by the way,
Yeah.
because Britt Lower, I think, is the name of the actor who plays
Mhm.
Helly, and she's obviously significantly younger than Patricia Arquette, but she carries herself with like all this authority and uh just like, hey, I am the one in control here when she's an Audi, in a way that's really convincing and very different from any character. And so it's a great dual performance from Britt Lower.
There's, I think Adam Scott has talked about, like in one of the many interviews, like how do you conceive of acting between the innie and the outie? He's like, well, there's many things, but it's like a really simple one. He's like, if you watch every time I go through the severed elevator, his shoulders are
posture,
slouched when he is going through, and when he exits, and it's the innie, his shoulders are propped up and ready because it's time to go to work. And he's like, that to me is like a small way of conveying the emotional differences between these two characters. And it's really lovely to see how thoughtful this show is about drawing those like, it's both subtle and big. It doesn't feel like it's binary. I mean, obviously Helly has some of the, I think, biggest differences between the two characters, but I always appreciate the ways the different actors handle it.
Let's talk about Irving's subplot this episode. Irving has difficulty going back to O&D, but he wants to go back to O&D and like search for some answers. He doesn't join Mark on his mission to try to find Miss Casey this episode. He bumps into one of Bert G's old coworkers, Felicia, and they reminisce about Bert G. It's very lovely. And then he shows her this book of drawings he made of Bert G, which actually looks amazing. Like, just really amazing art.
Yeah.
And then the book concludes with the dark hallway that he saw when he was outside of when he was like in his Audi's body. And we learn more about what that is. According to Felicia, it's called the Exports Hall. We send a lot of shipments there. Used to go ourselves, but now they send a guy. That's kind of what we know about the Exports Hall.
Exports Hall. That's a very that's a very ominous terminology for, it's both mundane and yet drips with dread.
Yeah, and we see some of the Exports Hall, I believe, in the opening credits of season 2 as well. And there's a lot of imagery with the Exports Hall. But now we have a name for it. That's about as much as that mystery has moved along this week.
Yeah,
there are some scenes with Seth and Natalie this week. Natalie is in Seth Milchick's office, and she has the board on the phone. And the board is jubilant at Seth Milchick's ascendancy. It wants him to feel appreciated, and it wants him to feel connected to Lumon's history. So it presents him a recanonized or recanonicalized version of paintings of Keir, which have been reimagined so that Seth looks like Keir in some ways. And Natalie says that she also received the same gift and was also deeply moved by it. This is fascinating to me because the show has not addressed race at all in any way thus far. And so I'm surprised the show went there. But for me, my interpretation of the scene is that it's a nod to the sometimes extremely clumsy and often offensive ways in which corporations try to reimagine themselves as being socially conscious, let's say. And we saw a lot of that in the wake of George Floyd, and I talked a little bit about that on earlier conversations about Severance. But that was kind of my read on what's going on here. Patrick Klepek, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this. I
think it's the scene is shot wonderfully because Milchick he's doing his best to bite
Right.
his tongue throughout all this. Like you get the sense that he looks at this with some real contempt. As like, oh, yes, I am appreciative. And it's this scene is some of my favorite acting from this character, because it's one of the first moments where we get a break, right? Like he's not around the severed floor characters that we know, in which he's a very like posture up / like complete weirdo, like when he dances and stuff like that. But there's a very different, like this, the closest we get to the real Milchick, I think, actually happens in the performance in this scene, in which he cracks a little bit in reacting to like this gift that is given to him. And I found it to be a really subdued but like really powerful performance, and I hope is an indication that we're going to get a lot more of like what Milchick's deal is throughout this season.
I'm also going to say this one other thing about this sequence. I agree with you. Like, great performances all around. How do I put this? I'm just going to try to say this as simply as I can. I think Lumon is very white coded, right?
Yeah.
It's a very white company.
Yeah.
And we see that in like who's running the place and the board, Helly, the Egan, like, and also the design, the aesthetic choices. And there's something to the idea, I think, about the place you work requiring you to subsume parts of yourself to the work. And that I think that this is something that characters like Milchick need to navigate. And this scene is an example of that, basically. So anyway, just another thought on like what Severance is trying to say about work overall, and not just like the mysteries.
Did you pick up on any, like, kind of at the very end there when the board hangs up?
Yeah.
Like a little tension between Milchick and Natalie? Like a little...
Here was my interpretation of that.
Because they're kind of a lingering...
Yeah.
Like the board hangs up, they're still looking at each other, and
then she says like the board has, the board has concluded the call, and then she says...
I was like, are they going to kiss? I was like, there's kind of a weirdness between the two of them at that moment.
That was not my interpretation at all.
No, I would just look. There's an absence. Like there's and I'm waiting for a thing to occur.
She says congratulations, and I think what we get the sense of is that Milchick is not happy with the paintings. Like I think he finds them offensive.
Yeah.
Right. And my guess is Natalie also has the same reaction. And so I think that moment between the two of them is a shared moment of, hey, we're both kind of being made subservient to this company that is like,
but we're going to smile.
Bullshit. That's a bullshit, but we can't say anything.
Yeah.
Can't say anything about it.
We're so happy.
I can't say it, but like, this is how we feel about this company. It sucks. And also I need to put a smile on it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what working at any company is these days.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Later, there's a scene where Natalie Kalin meets up with Ricken and talks about the book, right? The UUR, and they want to make an any version of it, which is but they want to, like, she's like, hey, Innies respond to a certain language, and I think they're going to remove some of the more inflammatory parts about the rebellious, belligerent parts of the UUR, the inciting revolution parts of the UUR, but that's kind of funny, Patrick Klepek, how would you feel if you knew your book was a huge success, but only with Innies?
It would require me to write a book, David.
So
which
is something I know you're probably going to do at some point. So
work on weekends? I don't know. That's what I'd have to do a book. And so,
would you rather your book is successful, but only with Innies, or no success at all?
Oh. I hope that I have more self-respect for myself than that character does, where I just rather not write the book at all. I think I could live. He doesn't have much else going on, is the sense I get. I think I got a little more going on than he does. I think there's a reason I haven't written the book. I don't need that to be fulfilled. No offense to my friends that write books. The time investment is wild.
I will say the UUR is incredible.
Such a great name. Such a great name for a
but
book.
the excerpts that we hear from it are also really amazing. Like the Severance wiki has some excerpts from the book. What is it to fail? My failure to break into the literary world in my 20s was devastating, yet it taught me a valuable lesson. That it was not me who was wrong, but literature itself. And that to truly find my place in that world, I would first need to break it entirely. And so I did. End quote.
That's
It's
Do we
amazing.
know who wrote that? I would love to know who wrote those bits of the book, because they did a wonderful. It feels like it's like a really good riff on those kind of empty calorie self-help
absolutely
books.
Absolutely. But my guess is they're going to remove passages like this. Our job is to taste free air. Your so-called boss may own the clock that taunts you from the wall, but my friends, the hour is yours. End quote. So that's probably the language that innies don't respond too well to.
They respond to it too well. Is the problem. Also, yeah, this is a random aside, but something that dawned upon me watching this episode was that obviously we realized the 5-month thing was a lie, and that actually days went by in between. Their sort of rebellion and then where we catch up with these characters. They really worked those claymation animators overtime to produce. Like was AI involved in the making of that Keanu Reeves voiced video? Because I just don't know that they could have produced that in the 48 to 72 hours that appears they were given to produce that video. If they did it, bravo. Wonderful work.
That was another thing too, is they are now going out and talking to people from other departments. And when Irving talks to Felicia, I'm like, is it going to come out that it hasn't been 5 months? Right. But I guess innies don't really keep track of time in the same way, right? Like they don't have the calendars as far as we know, right? They don't, you know what I mean?
I'm not sure if that's been acknowledged in the show, how they make sense of or don't make sense.
There's a moment in season 1 where they come back on a Monday and Helly's like, oh my gosh, like a whole weekend just, she gets in the elevator, they come back, it's Monday, she's like, oh my gosh, a whole weekend just happened, right? And so I think they do like understand the days of the week and stuff like that. But yeah, anyway, that I was wondering, like, is it going to come out that it hasn't been 5 months and that's how they're going to discover the deception?
Yeah.
But not yet. Let's talk about what happened with Innie, Mark, and Helly this week. We saw that Mark wants to put up missing posters of his wife, and they go searching. They're like, hey, has anyone seen Miss Casey? They find the goat room again. So I was like, I thought that was just going to be like a one-off thing in season 1, but nope, they're going to actually really explore it. There's a crawling space hallway type deal, and leads to more goats and a whole freaking meadow indoors, which by the way is extremely striking to look at, right? Just like you don't see something like that where it's like white walls and sterile ceilings and then like a meadow in the middle. They must have had to mind blowing to consider how they even created this. And then there's a guy in a goat suit. It's some weird, scary shit happening here. And then Brienne of Tarth, aka Gwendolyn Christie, shows up. And she says they're in mammalians, nurturable. And after a while, like Mark and Helly try to ask, hey, like, where's Miss Casey? Have you seen Miss Casey? And at first, mammalians, nurturable, and all those people are really resistant. They don't want to help them at all. In fact, they circle around them very scarily. But then Mark and Helly kind of make a plea, like if they can disappear this person, they can disappear any of us. And at that point, they acknowledge, actually, we will help you. We're not going to help you, but we're not going to oppose you continuing your mission. And they conclude by asking to see their bellies and saying, see, they are pouchless, because there's this whole thing where like different departments make up weird lore about each other, about like they have pouches, they have other things. And so I think that's what that's a reference to. Gotta say, this was a little bit shark jumpy to me. Patrick Klepek didn't love this whole thing, because I'm like, really, we're to believe that like all these people, go into the severed floor every day, like, Mark, maybe do they stay down there? Like
that was my first impulse. Like, oh, are we about to discover that there are full-time employees that work on this floor that are not severed
that live there, right?
Like their costumes are just patently like ridiculous. They look dirty.
Right, they look dirty, which is basically like, I guess you could accumulate that from a day of work, but
One day,
it
like
just
the meadow
clashes.
doesn't look that like it looks pretty clean, and like I don't know. I did maybe other stuff's going on throughout that day, but
Right.
I found it there was strong the others energy from Lost, which is like, oh right, here's just a bunch of random strange people doing strange stuff over here that we've never
Right.
met before, and that can go one way or the other. But I'm with you. This was one of those. I'm gonna cling to the 18 minutes
Right.
in the room with the wife and the innie talking, because this stuff it could go either way.
Right.
But it often breaks the wrong way in shows like this. So I don't know.
It
It's
just
not
yeah.
bad. I just don't know. I'm just sort of
Oftentimes when stuff like this happens in a show, you can kind of feel the creators like spitballing in the writers' room and saying, "Wouldn't it be wild if we like?" And there's a whole crew of them, and they're all like just raising the goats, and they all have dirt on their faces, and it's like nothing like we've seen on the Severed Floor before. You know, it's just wild stuff to make the audience go, "What?" That's what it felt like a little bit to
Yeah.
me. You know, of like, oh, it's just a bunch of random things that you don't expect to see there, and so far has not been super consequential to the plot. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe it'll come back and all make sense at the end. But yeah, didn't really jive with this whole sequence. It looks great, looks amazing.
It looks great. I'd say
Yeah.
like the part that the biggest takeaway I have from the sequence was you know, the Helena Helliar discourse. Like if some acting is occurring, some good acting is occurring in terms of like
Yes.
attempting to be
Yes,
this character that Mark knows. Like if we take, with the evidences in front of us, that like the most likely explanation of what's
Right.
occurring is that she is down there pretending to be the innie. At this point, if you're buying that theory, because that's what the show is sort of suggesting and pointing towards, you're kind of waiting for her to slip up.
right.
And I thought she did. There's obviously the moment between the two of them in the hall where they think about there's kind of a romantic tension.
Yes.
And I think that is very much the outie being like, am I supposed to be attracted and show attraction to the innies? Like that part was good. And I think leads further credence to this very credible
I think
theory.
she knows she's supposed to be attracted to him because she watched.
No, I know
video.
that, but then
Yeah.
there's knowing and then having to do it. Like if someone told you you're supposed to kiss this guy, you still got to do it, and you have to do it convincingly for it to not reveal. And I think the reason she doesn't kiss him is because I'm not sure that she's confident she can pull off it in a way that comes across as authentic.
Yeah.
But I do think she came across as very authentic in that sequence where she's running around like trying to convince them to to help them look for Gemma, because looking for Gemma continues the research of Cold Harbor. But that's a tough line for her to walk, and I assume one that she'll fall off at some point.
Yeah, indeed. Let's talk about what happens with Dylan this episode. Miss Huang takes Dylan to the security room. It seems like she's taking him to the security room, but actually it's the family visitation room. There are photos on the memory wall.
Oh,
just like David Chen predicted. That's what I said it would be. And she says, you've earned an 18-minute visitation event with your Audie's wife. Gretchen is there, his wife, and she's played by Merritt Weaver, very critically acclaimed actress. And they have like a conversation where they share about each other's lives. And there's one point where she says, Seth warned me this might be weird. I think she's talking about Seth Milchick. And Miss Huang interjects, please refrain from talking about sensitive information. And that part is very funny. But yeah, very cool scene. And this idea of like speaking with an innie version of your significant other. I'm shocked that Lumon allowed this at all because of like the potential security risk. But it's just it's a cool idea. And like you imagine what would my wife's innie would be? What would my innie be like? And what would like a conversation between the two of them be like? Because you know them, you are married to them, but they're a different person, right? And so it's a very interesting thing to consider. Any reflections on this, Patrick Klepek?
One, I guess I just try to put out of my mind like the security of Lumon and the Severed Floor doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Maybe they have evidence that like these people need enough autonomy for this to work. Maybe they're like evidence of failed experiments where why are they able to just walk down the hallway and crawl into the goat vent? Like just makes sort of feels like that would have a camera in that room and it would lock, like not let them get, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like there's a lot of ways to generate revolution here. And maybe what they've discovered is like, yeah, you have to let them think they can revolt and then you crush it. And then I don't know, whatever. But it just, some of that stuff sort of in the same way, like why would you let the innie talk to the Audi? Like it just doesn't, why would you let these security lapses be allowed to anyway? So I started to put that out of my head, and maybe that's an explanation, or it's just, it doesn't matter. But I found that exchange to be very touching. Like he dumb, like, I mean, probably my favorite line, Reed, like the way he hits that line is so good.
He dumb?
No.
I also found that sequence to be like really touching because like the age that these characters are at, where you have the baggage of kids and, it sounds like he's probably been with this person for a very, very long time. And there's just like an inertia to life that takes over where how could you even possibly reinvent yourself? Think of yourself as a different person. Like you're here, like you've got these 3 kids, like, I don't know, I'll just go find a job and like make it work. And there's like a real sadness to that exchange where you have a lot of like, I think it'd be really easy for some of these like severed characters, their wives to like, it's very like, like we get to go on vacations. Wow. Like, the severed version of ourselves goes into, working an Excel spreadsheet. And like what's actually at the truth of right here is like something much sadder. It's like this seems like a good dad, a good person, a good husband. But like that exchange of like he never found his place. Like that's really common. Like lots of people, you and I very fortunate that in many ways have been able to carve out like careers that intersect with our interests, but that's not everyone else. Like we're exceptions to the rule. And where you find value, worth in what you spend half of your day doing, I think is like a big question of the show that is exploring. And I think it's no better explored than like right here in like that exchange. And I love that because it's at the heart of taking this really wild concept and grounding it in totally relatable emotions between like 2 people that like love each other, and are able to then express their feelings in different ways because of the unique circumstances of this sci-fi setup. And I found it very moving.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Patrick. That's very, appreciate the sentiment. We also learn a little bit about their lives. So they have 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2. Also, I'm just going to put this out there. For a moment, I had doubts that this was actually his wife. I thought, oh, maybe this is a Lumon sort of actor to pretend to be his wife, which is something that they might do. But then,
especially
later,
if you thought like, the way this whole concept is introduced felt a little clandestine and like,
yes,
oh, we're going to pull you away from your little buddies and we're going to make you like, Lumon's going to make you a puppet. Like maybe that's still part of what is at play, but
yeah,
it doesn't feel sinister.
Right. But later you see Gretchen interact with Audi Dillon, so that like removes all doubt that she's actually real. And but that was my first thought is like, oh, this is a fake person. That was what my initial reaction was, because Lumon lies all the time. That's why.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Final plot line. Let's talk about what's going on with Audi Mark this episode. So the episode begins with like Mark driving in. He starts a stopwatch. He runs into the building. He's timing all his actions. Like, what's going on? And then we later learn that what he's trying to do is burn an image into his retinas using a lamp. And then hopefully, like when his innie wakes up, he sees the image and can react to it. There's actually a very touching moment where Mark and Devin are, I think, in Mark's basement, and they're putting together arts and crafts, like this light with the message, "Who is alive?" Because at the very end of season 1, innie Mark screams, "She's alive." So he wants to know, who are you referring to?
Yeah, reasonable.
And so there's a nice moment between the 2 of them, and I realized like these are really the only 2 quote unquote normal characters that speak in this show at all. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mm-hmm.
every other character is either an innie or part of Lumon, but Mark and his sister talking. They're the only two characters that resembles like normal human dialogue in the show, and so that was nice to see. But it's also striking, because we don't really get it anywhere else in the show. Anyway, Mark drives into the middle of seemingly nowhere to test out his new device. And so he has a little blanket over his head and he like stares at this lamp for a minute and he's trying to see if he can still see the image and how long it can last for. And all of a sudden, Ragabi shows up. Ragabi from season 1. And she explains to him why the burning the message into your retinas plan won't work, because when you go down into the innie place, the severed floor, your pupils dilate, it all goes away. And also, how's the innie going to send a message back? They have a conversation where he wants to know, is my wife still alive? Ragabi indicates, like, did he tell you your wife is still alive at Lumon? And he asks, is she? And Ragabi says, she was the last time I saw her. So it's like, like when did Ragabi leave Lumon? Like, what information does Ragabi have access to?
I gotta say, we talked about this in the beginning of the show about like shows not acknowledging gaps of time. Like, I had to pause the show, like refresh myself on who this character was.
Yeah.
Like, I really think the show should have woven in just a little bit to sort of like catch you up to speed of like who this character is, what's the relationship.
Ragabi says the only way to get information out of Lumon is through reintegration, which she has mastered. And before, she's like, do you want to do it? And before Mark can even think about it, she's like, do it. I want to see my wife. Which is like, okay, that's badass. He's like, yes, mess with my brain irreparably. Like, I don't give a shit. I just want to know. I just want to remember her again, which is like pretty amazing. So then Ragabi, all of a sudden they're in Mark's basement, and Ragabi is performing the reintegration process on Mark, and she's asking him a bunch of questions, like, do you remember protocol? And Ragabi asks her questions similar to what was asked of Helly R in episode 1. And the questions are, I wrote them down. What was your mother's name? What was her eye color? Did you love her? Name a dam. What does MDR stand for? What is something for which you feel shame? Where were you born? What month is it? And what is your first memory? And as she's asking, she's tuning this thing that was used to make the Lord of the Rings opening credits, with the sand on top of it, and kind of trying to unify these two brainwaves, and it's super cool. And then we see like all this flashing back. We see like Mark in Audi Mark in present day with his red sweater on, with a machine on him, and then it's like all of a sudden it's Innie Mark when he's waking up for the first time with the machine on him, and then Innie Mark without the machine, and then Audi Mark in Lumon without the machine. Like all the different permutations we see flashing back and forth. And we see kind of Mark wake up and remember what his first memory was, which like Innie Mark's first memory, which was going through the same process that Helly R went through in the first episode of the show. And I believe that's Petey's voice on the phone that's reading the questions to him. So that's what happens at the very end of this episode. He wakes up and presumably the reintegration has succeeded.
So I have a question. Because I didn't rewatch all of season 1, and there's a failed sort of reintegration that happens in season 1. Did we get clarity in season 1 on what reintegration means? Like, is it a unified person? Are you swapping personality? Like,
my sense is it is you now have both sets of memories.
But does any Mark cease to exist?
That's a philosophical question I can't answer.
That's what I.
What does it mean when a person has both sets of memory? It's like
this show has two characters. I'm loath to believe that in an instant we have lost like Innie Mark. So I was just wondering,
have we lost Innie Mark, or is it just the same person, Patrick Klepek?
Right. Well, that's the very nature of the show. I couldn't remember if the show came down in any conclusive way from season 1, but obviously, and very excitedly, it sounds like we should find out the answer to that, or some version of it, real soon.
Yeah. Well, let me put it this way. I mean, first of all, it's also been referred to as a full synaptic recoupling. So I assume that like this character has both sets of memories. That's my assumption.
Somebody died. But like someone was just murdered by the show's rules.
Or they became a new person, you know?
I don't know. The show treats in the like when they're given the chance to leave, part of the reason they don't is the death of existence.
Yeah.
And like that I guess I would find it very odd if the show, which like weighs on that idea of it would just snap any mark out of existence completely. So how the show handles that, we'll see. If I was betting, we have not seen the last of any mark. I just don't know how that's going to be portrayed because I can't fathom a world where we're led to believe that is a form of like suicide, like by the innies to take their own lives if they choose to leave, and that here we would just.
I guess I don't know why you're saying it that way though. Like it's not that's what he's doing is not the same thing as leaving. Do you know?
Right,
like,
but like I look at this as he strangled and murdered any mark as a result of reintegration. Yeah,
that is not my.
I think that is how the show portrays. Like, you don't know anything
it's
to
how
out
it portrays any like leaving the severed floor and never coming back again.
Yeah,
but that's not the same as reintegration. I think, right? Reintegration is, I think he like what I think the show is visually trying to convey at the end is like he now has both sets of memories. He now remembers both things.
Yeah,
Outie Mark remembers Innie Mark's memory. So they're now Innie Mark has become, reintegrated Mark. Outie Mark has become.
I don't think having memories is the same as. I view them as different people, and so I look at this as Outie Mark subsuming Innie Mark, like twins in like a mother's belly. Like I ate the other one for protein. That's mine now. I view this, and I will see how the show portrays it, but
yeah,
I think those are two different people. I think the whole idea of the severed floor, the severance, is the creation of another individual, not that it is that person absent like select memories, and that just reintegrating them seem like. So that's I view it as a murder. I'll see how the show portrays it. Like maybe it won't be as cataclysmic as they view it, but like that's how I took that final sequence to be. It was like, oh, I guess we just killed Innie Mark.
Huh. I mean, I could equally argue that that's how they just killed Outie Mark, but I'm not going to. I wanted to remind people the initial 5 questions that were asked of Helly are in episode 1 of the show. There's actually a great thread on Reddit about this, where they talk about the questions that are asked of Helly. The questions are, who are you? In what state were you born? Name any state or territory. What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast? And what is the color of your mother's eyes? Those are the questions. And this Reddit post by FitAct93 lays out each of those questions tests a different form of memory theoretically. Who are you? Test autobiographical memory. In what state were you born? Test semantic memory and autobiographical memory. Name any state. Test semantic memory. Basically, semantic memory is like stuff that you are aware of, general facts that are not associated with you, right? Like,
right.
If you wiped all your memory, you wouldn't know what the United States was, right? So you know something, and the question is, do you know what a state is, or which state? Can you name a state? What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast? Milchick tells Helly right before her procedure, Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast was 2 raw eggs, and Helly says, so I've heard. So question 4 is a test of short-term memory. And question 5, what is the color of your mother's eyes, is a visual memory question, right? Like, do you remember something visually, or did we also torch that in the severance experience? So, did we successfully remove that, right? So anyway, I thought that was cool. Different than the questions Ragabi asks, but there are some similarities. And so wanted to point out those similarities and kind of connect those things. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.